This video is a follow-up to my videos on my etheric weather engineering within my living space associated with my ceiling fan and the convex mirrors attached to it. It's complementary to that because whenever I did weather engineering experiments of my own, such as this tube you see up here that I don't use anymore, I just kind of have it around as a memento, a reminder of what I used to do. Effectively, I was able to make it rain, and I was able to bore a hole through the chemtrail mist that had shrouded the San Fernando Valley one day, and I have it documented, a photo documentation over at earthinglife.info. I think it's page number 3. There's a slideshow in which I took pictures of what had happened. Just 45 minutes in a biocircuit hooked up to this rainmaking tube of a very specific design. Not as good as it could have been designed, but it was still and it was augmented by my visit to a TM center for 6 hours, soaking up the bliss from the TM center. Because when you think about it, weather engineering is a siddhi, S-I-D-D-H-I. Patanjali Yoga Sutras. Read up on it. It's the exercise of power, and we do that all the time when we turn the ignition on in our motor vehicle. We're exercising power, but it's power we've become familiar with. Rain engineering is not something we're familiar with, and we think it's hooky and hokey and pokey and a bunch of bull. It's not. It's a technology like anything else, and if you don't have the knowledge, the wisdom, the skill, and the art of that specific technology, it would appear to be magic or just hocus pocus fantasy. Of course it would. Why shouldn't it? But it's specific technology, and if you have the skill to pull it off, then it's not magic, it's not fantasy, it's reality. It's power. It's the exercise of a specific technique to exercise power in our environment to create results that we desire. And Patanjali, in his Yoga Sutras, talks about the exercise of power, and it's no different. Any technology is an exercise of power. And as such, the way I used this rainmaking tool, immersing my body and my physiology and my consciousness into bliss made sanyama possible. And you have to read up on the term sanyama to find out what it means. But it empowered me so that when I got into the biocircuit with this rainmaking tool, I was able to create results. I was able to make it rain. So I know I can do it. But I have to say that involves a certain amount of effort because I don't have the bliss all the time such that I can make it rain. I know a few people who do. If they want to, they can make it rain ferociously, but they don't advertise. They're very modest about their ability, but I've seen it happen on more than one occasion. So I know some people are very good at it, just their own consciousness. So some of us, though, we have to use tools, and this is one of them. And it's a mild tool. It's nothing very strong. It's not intended to be very strong, because I'm only intending just my domain, my living space. The point of this video, though, is how to complement, how to counter, oppose, or supplement, I should say, how to complementary supplement rainmaking with grounding, with earthing. Because the original work of Wilhelm Reich that Trevor Constable based his early research on involved the requirement that you had to ground your rainmaking tube in a moving body of water. And as it turns out, a moving body of water is grounded to the earth. It's an elevation of the water table above the surface of the earth such that you have a river or a stream in the case of a moving body. And Wilhelm Reich took tubes from his rainmaking gun, we can say. It looked like an artillery gun on a battleship. He took those tubes down to the water and immersed them in the water so that his rainmaking artillery was grounded to the earth, but in a specific fashion of a moving body of water. Now, I oftentimes would like to ground my instruments to a tree, a living tree, because to me, that was a moving body of water, and I would like to get my body involved in part of a biocircuit arrangement, so I had the moving fluid of my body that the instrument was also grounded to. but I always had to ground them to the earth. That was number one. Short of anything else, I needed it always grounded to the earth. Now, I don't know how to ground that to the earth. It doesn't come to me any kind of convenient methodology with which I can do that. I guess I could, but I'm not sure how. How do I, I'd have to go to the silver backing on each mirror and have a wire and then have them all strung together and then have the wire come down somehow and not get all twisted and tangled up as this thing is spinning. So I'm not sure how I would do it. Would I have to have contact brushes that would wear out? What I do, though, is I sleep on an earthing bed sheet. And it's connected to a wire, a single wire. This is the simplest form of the radiant energy that Tesla discovered in his single wire technology, is a single wire connected to our body to, in this case, a mesh of silver wire that we lay on when we sleep at night. And that connection of that single wire goes out the window and down, I'm on the second story, it goes down to the ground level, and I have an earthing rod, a stainless steel earthing rod. It's only a foot long, which is like nothing when you want to ground. So I buried it slightly below ground level, and I made a hole, and I have to water it a couple of times a week, because this is a very dry environment. This is a desert environment. So I have to keep the soil moist. Ideally, I would have wanted to use a 2 or 3 foot long metal rod to use for grounding purposes, but the soil was too hard for me to dig a hole with the aid of a shovel, much less a deep hole. So I just left a little bit of a hole, so I water it periodically with a couple quarts of, actually a couple gallons of water 2-3 times a week, to let it soak in and make a depth of water going down past the grounding rod to the lower layers below it, to make connection with the water table, because I want to be connected to the water table deep in, underneath the surface of the ground. But I don't want to go to the electric outlet that I have in various places surrounding me in this room, because I'm very electrosensitive to the AC field. And the last thing I want to do is ground myself through the grounding port on an electric outlet, even though it may be wired to code and no danger, of getting electrocuted, especially since I have a 100 kilo ohm resistor at the connection point where the wire connects to the earthing sheet. It's built-in standard earthing appliance cords that you buy and use. It's to serve as a safety fuse. But I don't want to use an electric outlet because I learned that the AC current bleeds over. It creates a magnetic field. The hot wire in the wiring runs alongside the grounding wire in the conduit in our walls, and it creates a magnetic field, and it transfers that AC cycle switching over to the grounding wire. And so I actually pick that up if I were to use that as my means of grounding my earthing appliance to the earth. Eventually that goes to the cold water pipe underneath the building, but it has to go through the house wiring to get there, and that doesn't work well with me. It makes my cramping worse, my nervous tension and anxiety, such that my foot cramps happen more violently and more often. In the middle of the night, I'll wake up with a violent foot cramp, from deep sleep. And my stomach cramping will also happen more frequently and more violently. It's just not worth it. So I use a separate wire. I run along the perimeter of my room and out the window, and I have a crack, actually. This is a loose-fitting window, so I go through the crack and down the side of the building to my grounding rod outside. But this is complementary to the use of a rainmaking device, because I always found in the past, whenever I had a rainmaking device, I always had to ground it to the earth in order to keep things real. You don't want to lose your mind over this, because power is the exercise of power. It's very easy to lose your grip on reality and not make concrete decisions that take everything into consideration, to have a broad view. And earthing and grounding the physiology to the earth helps the psychology to have a broad view, a very broad view, because you've got the earth as your reference now. And there's another aspect to this that I should mention that I learned from a spiritual text that was written some time ago, that our physiology, our metabolism, is just like that of a plant, except that it's opposite in terms of the diurnal cycle. Diurnal means the daily cycle. Plants by day, when the sun is shining, the plants outside, they function the same way we do at night when we sleep. And Carnegie Institute in Washington, D.C. learned this about the green algae, the little chlorella green algae. Very specifically, when they put the algae in the complete darkness, its metabolism was the same as that of an animal. It consumed the storehouse of sugars that it manufactured during the day with the help of sunshine and chlorophyll. It used them at night. It burned them and to build tissue and to grow. That's why plants grow at night, because they actually consume the sugars that they stored, that they throughout the day, that they made during the daytime. But it had to be complete darkness. And during the daytime, the plants do the opposite. They make sugar from the sunlight and the oxygen. Well, at night, we do the opposite of plants. At nighttime, we do the same thing that the plants do at the daytime. We draw life force into our body. And that's why the earthing people say it's good to be grounded while you sleep at night. But that's why I say it's good to be grounded while you sleep at night, positioned underneath a weather modification instrument such as tumbling combs. Because this is where all the power of prana is going to be concentrated, right underneath the center of this vortex, as well as above, both above and below. I can't make use of the space above, but I'm going to be making use of the space directly below, because the foot of my bed is right here beneath the center of this vortex. So I'm a little off-centered, but at least it's close enough for the purposes of my use. I don't have to, do anything fancy. Just position the bed the way I want to against the wall between two windows, and it's close enough. So I'm centered here because this is sucking in prana and concentrating it in this location beneath the fan that I can make use of. And I'm earthed. I'm grounded. To counterbalance this, to keep things counterbalanced, because if you don't keep things counterbalanced with a counter-opposing force, you can go wacko. The exercise of power will do that. It'll make you go crazy, because it'll make your psychology tweaked, off balance. And you don't want to do that, especially with empowerment. You don't want to do that. You want to maintain balance, especially when you're empowering yourself, or else you'll be more tweaked than before you empowered yourself. Why would you want to do that? You want more power, but you want to maintain balance. And balance is the end result of grounding, because you maintain the same voltage charge, dielectric, electrostatic, whatever you want to call it, charge, that the earth has, that your physiology now has, as if you were sleeping on the bare earth or walking barefoot on moist grass. Charlie Lutz used to tell us occasionally, go outside and walk on the wet lawn. First thing in the morning, before you do anything else, walk barefoot on the wet lawn. And it'll have good improvement in your health. This was before earthing was ever rediscovered, decades before. He would tell us this advice. And it worked. It was very helpful. But who does it? Who wants to do it? So here now, with the convenience of an earthing appliance, I can sleep on the earth, electrically speaking, all night long, or whenever I want to take a nap during the daytime. So long as a part of my body, my skin, or my wet hair after a shower or whatever, makes contact with the earthing sheet, I'm making contact with the earth outside. And so long as I keep my grounding rod moist, because I didn't use a long enough grounding rod. When electrical contractors want to ground a lightning rod, they use a 9-foot copper pole and drive that into the earth. That's the proper way to do it. But I unfortunately had to use a 1-foot earthing grounding rod, which amounts to hardly anything, in terms of depth. So I have that small inconvenience. I have to water the hole twice a week or 3 times a week to moisten it with a few gallons of water and make sure it stays moist. Anyway, that's the point of this video. If you're going to do earthing, if you're going to do weather modification experiments of any sort, make sure that you yourself are grounded, at the very least. Now, if you can't ground your weather modification instrument, at least ground yourself, at the very least, if nothing else. I forgot to mention, why did I bring up the plants in the first place? The connection is, when we sleep at night, we want to be grounded to the earth just like plants are grounded in the daytime when they're manufacturing sugar from sunlight using their chlorophyll. They're not functioning like an animal. They're functioning like a plant. At nighttime, they're burning that sugar and functioning like an animal. So if they could get up off their roots and walk around on 2 feet, the only best time to do that would be at night. Of course, they don't need to. They don't have to go and catch their prey, so they don't need feet to do that because they were busy manufacturing sugar all day long. So they don't really need to uproot themselves, so to speak. But if we were to draw an analogy between our diurnal cycle being the opposite to theirs, in trying to figure out, well, if the human physiology, or an animal physiology for that matter, needs to be grounded, when is the most significant time? For us, it would be at night when we sleep. Because that's when they need to be grounded, is in the daytime when they're manufacturing sugar. Now, of course, not all plants are rooted in the earth. Some, are air plants. They literally have their roots exposed to the air. Okay, not all of them have to be rooted, but usually they cling. They're clingers. They cling to some other plant. Now, it's true, they don't send their roots into the sap of that plant. They just cling to the bark, let's say, of a tree. I guess that's a special case, and so that ruins my analogy. But I am trying to draw an analogy between the fact that plants are rooted in, when would it be most significant? Well, in the daytime, when they're drawing minerals and moisture and energy from the earth, as well as from the sun during the daytime when they manufacture sugar. And this is when we would want to be rooted in the earth at the opposite time of day, because our physiology has an opposite diurnal cycle to it. So that when they draw prana, life force, into themselves to manufacture their physical structure and the substance based on their structure, the sugar basing their cellulose structure on, they do that manufacture of sugar in the daytime, while we draw our prana into ourselves at night when we sleep. So the nighttime for us is the most significant time to be grounded, more than any other time of the day, and to do so while we sleep at night. So that was the reason why I drew in the analogy of plants and their opposite diurnal cycle to the animal physiology, in terms of, when in the diurnal cycle do we go through our various metabolic phases. So I forgot to mention it, but I'm mentioning it now.